Appalachia has 15 towns that are still on the map, but nobody lives in them. Nobody's allowed to live in them. And in some cases, nobody actually knows why everyone left. These aren't abandoned frontier settlements from 200 years ago. Some of these towns had schools, post offices, diners. People raised kids there, and then one day, they were gone. 15 towns, real places, some with houses that still have furniture inside. I've been down this rabbit hole for weeks, and I need to warn you, a few of these are going to make you genuinely uncomfortable. One town on this list, the US government says it doesn't exist anymore. We're going there anyway. And town number 13, that's the one I almost didn't include. You'll understand why when we get there. Let's start from the beginning. Appalachia is one of the most misunderstood regions in the entire country. It stretches across 13 states, from southern New York all the way down to Mississippi. 25 million people call it home, or they did. Because inside that stretch of mountains and valleys, there are thousands of towns that have been quietly erased. And when I say erased, I don't mean they slowly faded away. I mean the coal ran out overnight. I mean the company packed up and left and took the economy with it. I mean the federal government looked at a map, decided a reservoir was more important than a community, and gave people 30 days to get out. 3 things killed most of these towns. Coal collapse. When the mines shut down, there was nothing else. No backup plan, no severance, just nothing. Flood displacement. The TVA alone relocated over 100,000 people to build its dams. Entire towns sunk deliberately. And government relocation programs, which sounds clinical and reasonable until you understand what it actually meant for the people living through it. These weren't towns from 100 years ago. Some of these communities were thriving in your parents' lifetime. Before we get into the list, I want to plant something in your head. Town number 9 on this list was abandoned not because the people left voluntarily, but because they were forced out. I have the document. I'll show you exactly what it says. Okay, let's do this. Number 1, Thurmond, West Virginia. In the early 1900s, Thurmond was one of the most important railroad towns in the entire state. Millions of dollars in coal freight moved through here every single year. The place was packed. Hotels, saloons, a bank, constant noise and movement. Today, Thurmond has a population of 5 people. And the wild thing is, it looks like nobody told the buildings. The train station is still standing. The streets are still laid out exactly as they were. It's perfectly preserved, like someone pressed pause on an entire town and just walked away. It's technically inside the New River Gorge National Park now, which means it's protected, which means you can visit it. And people do, because there is nothing quite like standing on a main street where the buildings are intact and hearing complete silence. Thurmond is the opener because it eases you in. It's haunting, but it's beautiful. The towns coming up later, not so much. Number 2. I'm not giving this one a single town name because what happened here happened across dozens of small communities in eastern Kentucky, and the pattern is what matters. When the coal industry collapsed in Appalachian Kentucky, it didn't collapse slowly. It didn't give people a chance to adapt. Entire blocks of company housing were simply abandoned mid-renovation. Houses with walls half-painted, kitchens with cabinets installed on one side and bare drywall on the other. I found photos from a documentary crew that went through one of these streets in 2019. There's a child's bedroom with a bed still made, clothes still in the closet. The company that owned those houses went bankrupt. The houses reverted to county ownership. The counties didn't have the money to demolish them or maintain them. So they just sat there. Some of them are still sitting there right now. Number 3. Virginius Island, West Virginia. This one is different because the town didn't just get abandoned, it got swallowed. Virginius Island sits inside what is now Harper's Ferry National Historical Park. It was a thriving industrial community in the 1800s. Factories, workers' housing, a whole functioning ecosystem. Then the floods came, and kept coming. The Shenandoah River and the Potomac River converge right here, and when they flood, they really flood. Virginius Island got hit over and over again, and after each flood, people rebuilt. And after each flood, the government rebuilt less. Eventually, they stopped rebuilding entirely. What's left now are stone ruins, foundations, walls that go up to about shoulder height before they just stop. You can walk through it. It's a public trail inside the park. And if you time it right, early morning, mist on the river, it looks like something out of a dream. Or a nightmare, depending on your imagination. Number 4. Braddock, Pennsylvania. Braddock is technically not abandoned, and that's almost what makes it worse. At its peak in the early 1900s, Braddock had 20,000 residents, steel mills running around the clock, a Carnegie Library, one of the first Andrew Carnegie ever funded, a thriving downtown. Today, around 1,700 people. That's not a slow decline. That's a near-total collapse of an American community within a single century. The Carnegie Library is still there, still open, one of the few original Carnegie libraries still operating in the country. The steel mill is still there too, one furnace still running, owned by U.S. Steel. But the rest of downtown? Blocks and blocks of empty buildings, collapsed storefronts, a whole commercial district that exists physically but not functionally. Braddock has a mayor, an actual elected official trying to hold together what's left. There have been artists and urban farmers moving in over the last decade, people who saw the cheap real estate and the bones of something great. Whether that's a comeback story or just delaying the inevitable depends on who you ask. Number 5. Matewan, West Virginia. Now we start getting into darker territory. Matewan is where one of the most violent labor conflicts in American history took place, May 19, 1920, the Matewan Massacre. Baldwin Felt's detectives, hired by the coal company, came to town to evict miners who had joined the Union. The chief of police, Sid Hatfield, refused to allow it. What followed was a shootout in the middle of Main Street that left 10 people dead, including the mayor. The thing about Matewan is that it still exists. It's a small town, not fully abandoned, but large sections of it are, and the ones that are still occupied carry this weight. Locals don't love talking about what came after the massacre, the trials, the retaliations, the way the Union was eventually crushed anyway, despite everything those men died for. If you walk down Main Street in Matewan today, there are historical markers, but the people who live there will tell you the markers don't tell the whole story. They never do. We're 5 towns in. I want to remind you, the next 10 towns are where this gets significantly darker. Stay with me. Number 6. Let's talk about company towns, because what happened in places like Hesia, West Virginia, and dozens of others exactly like it is something that doesn't get nearly enough attention. In the early 1900s, coal companies didn't just employ people in Appalachia, they owned them, not literally, but functionally. Here's how it worked. The company built the town. The company owned every house. The company ran the only store, called the company store, and the company paid workers not in US dollars, but in scrip, tokens that could only be spent at the company store. You couldn't save money. You couldn't leave easily. If you got fired, you lost your house the same day. The ledgers from some of these company stores still exist. Researchers have gone through them, And what they found is that many workers ended every week owing the company money, meaning they worked the entire week and came out behind. When the coal ran out and the companies left, they took everything, left the buildings, left the infrastructure, left the people. The houses in some of these former company towns are still standing, still legally owned by corporate successors, still not available to the people whose families lived there for generations. Number 7. This one involves the EPA, and it's the first town on this list where the reason people left wasn't economic, it was survival. For decades, lead and zinc mining in the tri-state area, Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, left behind massive piles of mining waste called chat. Millions of tons of it, sitting in open piles, blowing in the wind, leaching into the groundwater. Kids in the area were tested for blood lead levels in the late 1990s. The numbers were catastrophic. Developmental delays, neurological damage, the kind of harm that doesn't show up until years later. The EPA declared the area a Superfund site, one of the most contaminated places in the United States. And then, and this is the part that should make you angry, it came out that the extent of contamination had been known for years before residents were fully informed. The town of Pitcher, Oklahoma, which is technically just outside Appalachia, but part of the same mining belt, was essentially told, "The land is too poisoned to clean, just leave." They did. The chat piles are still there. Number 8. Nora, Virginia. Nora is different from everything we've talked about so far because it wasn't killed by disaster or industry collapse. It was killed by a reroute. Nora was a railroad town in the coal fields of southwestern Virginia. The railroad was its reason for existing. Goods came in. Coal went out. The town was built entirely around that single line. Then the railroad company decided to reroute. The tracks shifted, and almost overnight, the reason for Nora's existence was gone. What's remarkable about Nora is the time capsule quality of what's left. The town didn't burn down, it didn't flood, it just slowly emptied as people followed the work. There are buildings there that look exactly as they did in the 1950s. Not because anyone preserved them, because there was no one left to change anything. No vandalism, no development, just stillness. In a strange way, Nora is one of the most intact ghost towns in the entire country. If you went there tomorrow, you could almost convince yourself the people just stepped out. Number 9. Lewiston, Tennessee. I told you at the beginning of this video that I had a document to show you. This is the town. In 1943, the Tennessee Valley Authority, the TVA, needed to flood a valley to create Norris Lake. The government had decided, this water is more valuable than these homes. The residents of Lewiston were given notice. They were told to leave. Their houses were demolished or burned. Their cemetery was relocated, and then the valley was flooded. The town of Lewiston ceased to exist. Except it didn't. Every time there's a significant drought and the water level in Norris Lake drops far enough, Lewiston comes back. Foundations emerge from the water. Roadbeds, stone walls, the outlines of where buildings used to be. Perfectly visible, perfectly intact, just underwater most of the time. Residents who were displaced, and their descendants, have visited the exposed ruins. There are photos of elderly men and women standing in what used to be their living rooms, now lakebed, pointing at where the furniture was. The TVA's official position is that the relocation was necessary and handled appropriately. The families who were moved have a different view. Number 10. There's a pattern that shows up in coal country over and over again, and I want to name it clearly before we get into the final 5 towns. Company housing, not the towns that slowly emptied, the ones where the company just stopped showing up one day. There are rows of houses in the West Virginia coal fields where the company literally walked away from its own property overnight. Maintenance stopped, utilities cut, and the workers who were living there, who had no other options, stayed as long as they could. Some stayed for years after the company left. What happens to a house when it's occupied but completely unmaintained for a decade? It falls apart around the people inside it. And when those people finally leave too, because they have to, what's left is something genuinely haunting. Furniture still in place, personal items still on shelves, not because people wanted to leave them, because they had no way to take everything and no reason to believe anyone was coming back. No one did. 10 down, 5 to go. I want you to notice something about the next 5 towns. They have something in common, something I didn't expect when I started putting this list together. I'll tell you what it is at the end. Number 11, Fayette Station, West Virginia. This one involves divers. Fayette Station was a small community on the banks of the New River, right at the base of what's now the New River Gorge Bridge, the longest single-arch steel bridge in the Western Hemisphere. When the bridge was built and the gorge became more developed, the community at the bottom was essentially cut off and abandoned. But that's not the strange part. The New River floods, and when it floods at Fayette Station, it doesn't just cover the land, it covers the structures. Divers who've gone into the river near the old town site have reported finding intact building remnants underwater, stone foundations, brick walls, in some cases, structural elements still in place. It's not an underwater city, I want to be clear about that, but the idea that there are physical remnants of a real community sitting in the riverbed of the New River right now as we have this conversation, that does something to you.
Number 12, Stonga, Virginia. Stonga may be one of the most legally bizarre cases on this entire list. It's a former coal company town in Wise County, Virginia. It still appears on maps. It still has a zip code. Technically, it's still a named place. But nobody lives there. And here's the strange part. The property deeds in Stonga are still controlled by corporate successors to the coal company that went bankrupt in 1987. The land isn't public. It isn't available for purchase. And it isn't being developed. It's stuck in legal limbo. Across Appalachia, there are communities that would gladly use that land. Places where housing is desperately needed. Places where roads, utility lines, and building foundations already exist. Yet they sit unused. Because of the way corporate bankruptcy and property law work, the land has remained frozen for decades. The houses continue to deteriorate, the roads slowly crumble, and the paperwork remains exactly where it was, 1987. Number 13, Bury, West Virginia. This is the one I almost didn't include. Bury was a coal town, deep in the woods of Boone County. And when I say deep, I mean deep. There are no roads that lead directly there anymore. You have to walk through overgrown trails, through forest that has been reclaiming the land for decades. Most of the wooden buildings are gone. What remains is mostly brick and stone. The ruins don't look American. They look like something from another country or another century. Here's the part that made me hesitate. Several sources, including a researcher who documented the site extensively, say that descendants of former residents still return to Bury regularly. Why they return has never been fully explained publicly. I reached out to learn more. The response was polite, but clear. What happens at Bury is private. It's not for documentation. Some things belong to the people who lived there, not to the internet. And I respect that, but I still wanted to include Bury. Because that connection matters. Whatever brings people back, decade after decade, tells us something important. These weren't just places. They were communities. And sometimes, a community survives long after the buildings are gone. Number 14, Sulphur Springs, North Carolina. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, Sulphur Springs was a resort destination. That's not a word you associate with Appalachia. But it was true. People came from around the region for the sulfur springs, believed to have medicinal properties. There was a hotel, a pavilion, an entire resort infrastructure built into the mountains of what's now Pisgah National Forest. And then the fashion for resort towns changed. The railroad routes changed. People stopped coming. The forest moved in. What makes Sulphur Springs unusual is that the buildings are still there, absorbed into the forest. Yes, vines through the windows, trees growing through floors, but structurally present. It is officially off-trail. The Forest Service doesn't advertise it. Finding it requires research, navigation, and going places the signs tell you not to go. Which, if you're the kind of person who watched this far into a video about abandoned Appalachian towns, probably sounds exactly like a Tuesday. One more. I saved number 15 for last, because it's the only town on this entire list where the story isn't over. The only town where the fight never really ended. Where it's still being fought. Number 15. In 1931, 9 black teenagers, ages 13 to 19, were pulled off a freight train near Scottsboro, Alabama, on the edge of Appalachian territory. They were falsely accused. They were convicted in trials that lasted less than a day. 8 of them were sentenced to death. The Scottsboro Boys case became one of the most significant civil rights legal battles in American history. The U.S. Supreme Court weighed in twice. International attention. Protests across the world. And yet, the communities around Scottsboro where this history happened remain largely unacknowledged. The area around Widows Creek, where some of the most significant events of that period took place, has no formal memorial. No recognized historical site. Local historical groups have been pushing for recognition for more than 40 years. 40 years. This isn't just an abandoned place. It's an abandoned reckoning, a piece of American history that was allowed to sit, unmaintained, unrecognized, quietly deteriorating, the same way the buildings are. And that's the thing that connects all 15 towns on this list. The thing I mentioned, I'd tell you at the end. In every single one of these places, whether it was economic abandonment, government displacement, corporate negligence, or historical erasure, someone made a decision. These towns didn't just die. They were left to die, deliberately, by people with power who decided that what these communities needed didn't matter. That's what Appalachia is. Not a ghost, a choice. I told you at the beginning of this video that some of these towns were still on the map. Here's what that actually means. A dot on a map is the last thing that disappears. The people leave first, then the economy, then the buildings, then the roads, and the map dot hangs around for years, sometimes decades, after everything else is gone. Like the last light from a star that burned out a long time ago. 15 towns, 15 different reasons, but one pattern underneath all of it. These places were inconvenient, and when something is inconvenient for long enough, people find ways not to see it anymore. I don't think that should be acceptable, and I don't think you do either. These towns didn't disappear. They were made to disappear, and nobody was supposed to notice. If you watched this whole video, thank you. Genuinely. This channel exists to cover exactly this kind of story. The places and histories that should be documented before they're completely gone. If that's the kind of content you want to see more of, subscribe. I post every week, and the next video goes even deeper. I want to know what you think. Out of these 15 towns, which one would you actually go visit? And which one would you absolutely never go near? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want to see more abandoned places, check out the video on screen right now. It's about towns where houses are selling for less than a used car. And the reasons why are darker than you'd expect. See you next week.